The scream turned to a pained gurgle as the insectoid slaver tightened the neural collar around the human's neck, not knowing that Jack Smith would soon make the alien regret ever trying to enslave a human. Jack, a battle-hardened ex-Special Forces mercenary, had let himself get captured. He needed intel on the Prilorians' slave operation, but first he had to survive the brutal processing. The alien guards stripped Jack naked. They threw him in a cold, dark cell. He wasn't alone. Dozens of slaves from conquered worlds huddled together, naked, cold, afraid. A reptilian slave named Kreshk approached Jack. "You're gonna die, human," he hissed quietly. "The implants will fry your brain, make you a hollow puppet." The guards dragged them out, forced them into implantation pods, drilled through their skulls. Jack gritted his teeth as the neural implant wormed into his brain. Most slaves went limp immediately, neural functions suppressed. But Jack's enhanced physiology and mental conditioning let him resist. He played possum, hanging limply, as they carried his obedient body to the slave pens. He had to resist the implant, gather intel and escape. If he failed, millions more innocents would be enslaved. Humanity's first contact would turn to war. He was the only one who could stop it. The slave pens reeked of sweat, blood, and desperation. Hundreds of naked bodies were crammed together, shivering from cold and fear. Insectoid guards watched from above, electroprods at the ready to punish any dissent. Jack and Kreshk were shoved into a work crew, forced to labor for grueling hours assembling Prilorian war machines. Jack's hands ached as he connected circuits and welded metal. His implant delivered shocks of agony whenever he slowed, but he pushed through the pain, using the monotonous work to probe his implant's limits. He discovered that flexing certain muscles or thinking particular thoughts triggered punishment. With careful experimentation, he found ways to circumvent the implant, brief moments of respite to gather his strength. "You're tough for a human," Kreshk muttered, mandibles clacking. "Most of your kind break after a few hours." "So I'm not most humans," Jack grunted back. He nodded subtly to a burly Korgath slave passing circuit boards down the line. "What do you know about him?" Kreshk's eyes widened. "That's Thraxus. He's been here longer than anyone. Heard he's planning something big." As they labored, Jack studied the facility, gathering intel. He noted the energy shields shimmering at the exits, the heavy guard presence around the central command spire, defensible choke points and armory locations. Anything that could aid an escape. Over the next few work shifts, Jack made contact with Thraxus and his rebels. The Korgath was initially distrustful, but Jack's knowledge of tactics and Kreshk's mechanical skills proved their value. "Your plan has promise," Jack said, keeping his voice low as they huddled in a maintenance tunnel. "But you'll need to neutralize the energy shields first. They're controlled from the central spire." Thraxus nodded grimly. "I have a man on the inside, a Prilorian technician named Ziktar. He's sympathetic to our cause. Was enslaved himself before their elevation program." "Can he lower the shields?" Kreshk asked. "For a short time, but it won't be easy." Thraxus brought up a crude schematic of the facility, etched on a scrap of metal. "The shield controls are deep in the most heavily secured sector." Jack traced a claw along potential infiltration routes. His mind raced with possibilities. "Then we'll need a diversion, something to draw the guards away from the objective. We can use their own automated security against them." Thraxus leaned closer, his breath hissing through razor teeth. "Tell me more, human. I like the way you think." Together, the three unlikely allies pored over the plans, refining their scheme. It was a desperate gamble, but Jack knew it was their only chance. He just prayed his body and mind could hold out long enough to see it through. The fate of countless innocents hung in the balance. Failure was not an option. The day of the uprising arrived. Jack and Kreshk exchanged a knowing glance as they took their positions on the assembly line. The air buzzed with tension. The other slaves sensed something was about to happen, but kept their heads down, focusing on their work. Jack's fingers moved deftly over the circuitry of a Prilorian plasma cannon, but instead of connecting the firing mechanism, he subtly crossed the wires, overloading the power cell. Kreshk did the same to a rack of pulse grenades, turning them into miniature time bombs. Sweat trickled down Jack's back as he waited for the right moment. The Prilorian guards prowled the catwalks above, their compound eyes scanning for any hint of disobedience. Jack's implant prickled, threatening to punish him for his treachery. Just a little longer. A sudden explosion rocked the assembly line. The sabotaged cannon detonated in a blinding flash of plasma, setting off a chain reaction in the volatile munitions. Alarms blared as the grenades exploded, showering the area with shrapnel and sparks. Slaves screamed and scattered as the guards swarmed towards the chaos, electroprods crackling. In the confusion, no one noticed Jack and Kreshk slipping away into a maintenance tunnel. "That ought to keep them busy for a while," Jack said as they crawled through the cramped passage, the sounds of battle echoing behind them. "I just hope Thraxus can pull off his end of the plan," Kreshk chittered nervously. In the central command spire, all hell was breaking loose. Thraxus and his rebels burst from hiding, wielding makeshift weapons and stolen Prilorian blasters. They clashed with the elite insectoid guards in a fierce firefight, carapace and chitin shattering under the hail of energy bolts. "Forward for freedom!" Thraxus roared, his massive frame shrugging off hits as he laid waste to the defenders with a heavy pulse cannon. But even with surprise on their side, the rebels were outnumbered and outgunned. They took heavy casualties as they pushed deeper into the spire, the Prilorian superior technology taking its toll. Jack emerged from a ventilation duct behind enemy lines, his bare skin smeared with grease and grime. Moving with predatory grace, he ambushed a squad of guards, his hands a blur as he dispatched them with brutal efficiency. A snap of a neck, a twist of a thorax, a precise strike to a nerve cluster. The Prilorians crumpled like puppets with their strings cut. Jack scooped up their fallen weapons and tossed one to Kreshk. Together they advanced through the command center, neutralizing automated turrets and security drones. The path of destruction they left in their wake allowed Thraxus and the rebels to punch through to the control room. The Prilorian commander stood defiantly before a massive holographic display, his claws flying over the controls. The energy shields flickered and died, but a new threat emerged. "Fools," the commander hissed. "You may have breached our defenses, but you'll never leave this facility alive." A klaxon sounded, and a robotic voice announced the initiation of a self-destruct sequence. The countdown began, promising annihilation in mere minutes. Jack leaped forward, tackling the commander away from the console. They grappled on the floor, a tangle of human and insectoid, as Jack sought to subdue his foe. But the commander was strong, his exoskeleton hard as steel. Jack took a punishing blow to the ribs, feeling something crack. The pain from his implant flared, threatening to overwhelm him. Gritting his teeth, Jack reached deep within himself, drawing on every ounce of his training and willpower. He pictured the face of every innocent soul he'd seen enslaved, every atrocity the Prilorians had committed. With a roar of defiance, he surged to his feet, launching a devastating combo of strikes. The commander's exoskeleton cracked under the onslaught, ichor spurting from ruptured flesh. Jack hurled the broken body aside and leapt to the console. His fingers flew over the alien controls, desperately searching for the abort sequence. The countdown ticked downward, the numbers blazing red. 5, 4, 3. With a final triumphant keystroke, Jack overrode the self-destruct. The countdown froze, then disappeared. The robotic voice fell silent. Cheers erupted from the rebels as they realized they'd won. The facility was theirs. Jack sagged against the console, his body battered but his spirit unbroken. Kreshk laid a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of camaraderie. "So you did it, human. We're free." Jack managed a weary smile. "Not yet. We still need to get these people to safety." Thraxus strode forward, his massive frame dwarfing the other rebels. "Leave that to me. I'll organize the evacuation. We'll take the Prilorians' own ships and scatter to the stars." As the rebels set to work, freeing slaves and preparing for departure, Jack looked out at the stars visible through the command center viewport. He knew this was only the beginning. The Prilorians would not take this defeat lightly. There would be reprisals, a manhunt for those who dared defy their rule. But for now, in this moment, they had struck a blow for freedom. They had shown that even the most oppressed, the most downtrodden, could rise up and seize their destiny. And Jack would be there to lead the fight, for as long as it took. The stolen Prilorian ships streaked through the void, their hulls scarred and pitted from the narrow escape. Jack stood on the bridge of the lead vessel, his gaze fixed on the stars streaking past the viewport. Kreshk and Thraxus flanked him, their presence a comforting reminder of their shared triumph. "We can't keep running forever," Kreshk said, his mandibles twitching. "The Prilorians will hunt us to the ends of the galaxy." Thraxus nodded grimly. "We need a place to regroup, to plan our next move." Jack pulled up a holographic star map, his fingers dancing over the alien controls. "There," he said, pointing to a small, isolated system. "That planet is uncharted, off the main trade routes. We can set up a base there, gather our strength." The journey to the remote world was tense, the refugees constantly scanning for signs of pursuit. But as they entered orbit and beheld the lush, verdant surface below, a sense of hope bloomed in their chests. They landed in a hidden valley, the ships nestled between towering cliffs and dense jungle. Jack emerged from the vessel, breathing deep of the clean, untainted air. It was a far cry from the stench and despair of the slave pens. In the days that followed, the refugees threw themselves into building their new home. They salvaged equipment and materials from the ships, constructing rudimentary shelters and defenses. Jack worked tirelessly, his skills in tactics and survival proving invaluable. As word of their sanctuary spread, other escaped slaves began to trickle in. Kreshk and Thraxus welcomed them, offering food, shelter, and a chance at a new life. The hidden base grew, a diverse community of beings united by their shared trauma and desire for freedom. Jack took on the role of strategic planner, drawing on his military experience to shape the ragtag group into a fighting force. He ran drills and training exercises, teaching the recruits how to shoot, how to move, how to think like soldiers. "Remember," he barked as they ran obstacle courses and sparred in the dirt, "the Prilorians rely on their technology, their armor, their weapons. Strip those away, and they're just flesh and bone like the rest of us." Under Jack's guidance, the Resistance began to launch hit-and-run attacks against Prilorian outposts and supply lines. They struck hard and fast, using the element of surprise to their advantage. Stolen weapons and explosives wreaked havoc on the enemy, while hacked communications and sabotaged equipment sowed chaos in their ranks. News of their victories spread like wildfire, whispered in the slave pens and shouted in the streets of conquered worlds. The legend of Jack and his rebels grew, a beacon of hope for the oppressed and downtrodden. But their success did not go unnoticed. In the halls of the Prilorian Empire, the ruling council seethed with rage and humiliation. The escaped slaves had become more than a nuisance. They were a symbol, a rallying cry for all those who dared to dream of defiance. "This cannot stand," hissed the Prilorian Emperor, his compound eyes glittering with malice. "The slaves must be reminded of their place. We will make an example of these rebels, crush them utterly, so that none may ever again challenge our rule." The Prilorian war machine mobilized, a vast armada of ships and soldiers prepared to descend upon the rebel base and wipe it from existence. The counter-offensive was launched, the might of an empire brought to bear against a ragtag band of freedom fighters. On the hidden planet, Jack stood before his assembled rebels, his eyes hard and determined. Kreshk and Thraxus stood at his side, ready to face whatever came. "They're coming for us," Jack said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "The Prilorians think they can break us, crush our spirit with overwhelming force. But they're wrong." He raised a clenched fist, his words ringing with conviction. "We are more than just escaped slaves. We are the spark that will ignite the fires of rebellion across the galaxy. We will fight, and we will win, not just for ourselves, but for every being who has ever suffered under the Prilorian yoke." As the rebels cheered and roared their defiance, Jack turned his gaze to the sky, ready to face the coming storm. The battle for freedom was only just beginning. The sky above the rebel base burned as the Prilorian armada descended, a swarm of angular ships bristling with weapons. The ground shook with the impact of orbital bombardment, geysers of dirt and rock erupting like wounds across the once pristine landscape. In the command bunker, Jack stood before a holographic display, his eyes hard as he tracked the enemy's movements. Kresk and Thraxus flanked him, their faces grim. "They're coming in hard and fast," Kresk said, his claws tapping nervously against his rifle. "Our perimeter defenses won't hold for long." Jack nodded, his jaw set. "They're not meant to. We let them punch through, draw them into the kill zones." He turned to Thraxus, the Korgoth's massive frame hunched over a console. "Are the tunnels ready?" Thraxus bared his teeth in a predatory grin. "Rigged and waiting, one touch of a button, and the Prilorians will be buried in rubble." Jack allowed himself a small smile. The tunnel network had been one of his most ambitious projects, a web of underground passages honeycombing the base. Some led to hidden bunkers and armories, while others, well, the Prilorians were in for a nasty surprise. The bunker shook as the bombardment intensified, dust sifting from the ceiling. Jack activated his comms, his voice broadcasting to every rebel across the base. "This is it, people, the moment we've been preparing for. The Prilorians think they can break us, but we're going to show them just how wrong they are. Stick to the plan, trust in each other, and we'll send these bastards running back to their empire with their tails between their legs." Cheers and roars of defiance echoed back over the comms, a cacophony of alien voices united in their determination. Jack felt a swell of pride in his chest. These beings, once broken and enslaved, had become a force to be reckoned with. The ground assault began, waves of Prilorian soldiers swarming over the rugged terrain. The rebel defenses opened up, a storm of blaster fire and explosions ripping through the enemy ranks. But the Prilorians kept coming, heedless of their losses, driven by the relentless will of their emperor. Jack watched as the battle unfolded, his mind racing with calculations and contingencies. The outer defenses were falling, the rebels pulling back to secondary positions just as planned. The Prilorians surged forward, their victory seemingly assured. And then the tunnels exploded. The ground collapsed beneath the Prilorian advance, swallowing entire platoons in a maelstrom of rock and debris. The rebels, safe in their reinforced bunkers, poured fire into the disorganized survivors. But Jack knew this was only the beginning. The Prilorians were too disciplined, too fanatical to be routed so easily. They would regroup, adapt their tactics, and there was still the matter of the Emperor himself. He turned to Kresk and Thraxus, his expression hardening. "It's time. We need to take out the head of the snake." The two aliens nodded, understanding the gravity of the mission. Together they geared up and slipped out of the bunker, making their way through the chaos of the battle towards the looming shape of the Prilorian flagship. Infiltrating the massive vessel was a challenge, even with their stolen access codes and Jack's intimate knowledge of Prilorian security protocols. They moved like ghosts through the corridors, neutralizing patrols and sentries with ruthless efficiency. But as they breached the command deck, they found themselves face to face with the Emperor himself. The towering insectoid regarded them with cold, multifaceted eyes, his chitinous armor gleaming under the harsh lights. "Did you truly think you could defy the might of the Prilorian Empire?" the Emperor hissed, his mandibles clicking with disdain. "You are nothing more than rebellious slaves to be crushed beneath our heel." Jack stepped forward, his rifle leveled at the Emperor's head. "We're not slaves anymore. We're free beings and we'll fight to our last breath to stay that way." The Emperor lunged, moving with a speed and ferocity that belied his size. Jack barely had time to react before he was locked in a brutal hand-to-hand battle, the Emperor's claws and Jack's augmented strength clashing in a deadly dance. Kresk and Thraxus moved to assist, but were quickly engaged by the Emperor's personal guard. Blaster fire and the clash of metal on chitin filled the air as the command deck dissolved into a vicious melee. Jack fought with every ounce of skill and determination he possessed, drawing on his years of training, and the burning desire for freedom that had sustained him through the darkest moments of his enslavement. But the Emperor was a formidable opponent, his natural armor and lightning-fast reflexes turning aside blows that would have felled a lesser being. They traded strikes and counter-strikes, the Emperor's claws raking across Jack's flesh as he pounded against the insectoid's exoskeleton. Pain flared through Jack's body, his implants screaming with the effort of keeping him moving, keeping him fighting. In a moment of desperation, Jack lunged forward, tackling the Emperor, and sending them both crashing to the deck. They grappled and rolled, each seeking to gain the upper hand. Jack's fingers scrabbled for purchase on the Emperor's armor, searching for a weak point, a vulnerability. And then he found it. A small gap at the base of the Emperor's neck, a chink in the chitinous plates. Jack drove his fist into the opening, feeling the sickening crunch of flesh and bone beneath his knuckles. The Emperor convulsed, ichor spurting from the wound. Jack pressed his advantage, raining blows down upon the stricken insectoid until the Emperor's struggles ceased and he lay still, his compound eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling. Jack staggered to his feet, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Around him the command deck was in shambles, the bodies of Prilorian guards littering the floor. Kreshk and Thraxus, battered but alive, limped to his side. "Is it over?" Kreshk asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Jack shook his head. "Not yet, but we've dealt them a blow they won't soon forget." With the Emperor dead and their chain of command thrown into disarray, the Prilorian forces withdrew, their ships pulling away from the planet in a ragged retreat. The rebels, exhausted but victorious, emerged from their bunkers to the sight of a sky free of enemy vessels. In the days that followed, news of the Emperor's fall spread like wildfire across the galaxy. Enslaved worlds rose up in rebellion, the Prilorian Empire's grip on its vassals weakening with each passing moment. The resistance, once a flickering ember, had become a raging inferno. Jack, Kreshk and Thraxus found themselves at the center of it all, hailed as heroes and liberators by those they had freed. But they knew their work was far from over. The Prilorians, though weakened, were still a threat, and there were countless other worlds still suffering under the yoke of oppression. As they gathered in the war room, the holographic star map glowing before them, Jack felt a sense of purpose settle over him. He had started this journey as a lone human, lost in a galaxy of suffering and injustice, but now he was part of something greater, a movement that would change the face of the universe itself. He looked to his companions, seeing the same determination in their eyes. "So," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips, "where to next?" You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.